New updates in the Idaho college student murders case. One of the surviving roommates has now agreed to an interview with Bryan Kohberger's defense team after fighting to stay out of the proceedings. 21-year-old Bethany Funke lived in the same off-campus home where Madison Mogan, Zana Kernodle, Kaylee Gonsalves, and Ethan Chapin were all brutally stabbed to death in November. This week, we learned that the surviving roommate will meet with lawyers from suspect Bryan Kohberger's defense team at her home in Reno, Nevada. Now, according to court documents, Funke's lawyers initially argued against their client testifying at the June preliminary hearing or even during a trial. But in new filings on Wednesday, both sides have agreed to the defense's interview in order to dismiss Funke's subpoena. Depending on the information that Funke gives investigators, she could ultimately skip out of that preliminary hearing. So let's talk about what this means. Terry, a lot of evidence against Bryan Kohberger at this point. What do you think it will be? What do you think this is going to be for the overall defense strategy?
I think the number one thing he is going to say is, listen, it wasn't me. You have the wrong person here. And he's going to go through all of the evidence that they have so far. And what do they have? They have the car. He's going to say, I wasn't driving that car. They have DNA evidence on that sheath. He's going to say, that wasn't my evidence. It doesn't mean that I did it. And you know that that is possible. We've seen it before in other trials, to wit, the O.J. Simpson case. He's going to say that he wasn't described properly. We know DM gave a description, and now I think he's going to try to say no one else in that house could describe him. So I definitely think that is going to be part of it. And I think he's going to point to the fact, what is the motive here? Why would I do this? I have no criminal record. Why would I ever go and ruin my career and kill all of these individuals? And the last thing I think that the defense is going to do is what all of the defense generally does, and what they have to do is to say, look, beyond a reasonable doubt. And there are doubts here, and unless the prosecution proves this case beyond a reasonable doubt, he could get away with it.
But Bryan, if Funke does speak to Kohberger's defense, how in the end is that going to help them at a preliminary hearing or at a trial?
It's kind of two parts, Jesse. First, it's investigatory. Whatever information that they can get from Funke, they might be able to build upon that and go and create a better defense for the preliminary hearing or even the trial in the future. If Funke decides not to testify at the preliminary hearing, I think she'll probably testify at the trial. I don't think she can get out of that. But they might be able to use her statements if an investigator or someone is there and say, hey, she's a missing witness. We can't get her. She's outside of our subpoena power. But this is what she told us. And maybe what she didn't hear helps in proving that these statements as to what other people or other survivors in the house did say they heard, causing some sort of question, did it happen or did it not?
Yeah, and it's still not clear what information she has that might be exculpatory to Bryan Kohberger. We're switching gears now to the ongoing trial of Colorado stepmom Letitia Stauch, accused of killing her 11-year-old stepson Gannon. He was reported missing in January of 2020. 2 months later, his body was found hundreds of miles away, stuffed in a suitcase under a Florida highway. The defendant reported Gannon missing to police. She said that he went to a friend's house and never came home. 2 weeks before Gannon's body was found, investigators arrested Stauch after finding blood evidence as well as inconsistencies in her story. Psychologists have interviewed Letitia Stauch multiple times over the years, completing competency evaluations. 2 of those experts testified on Wednesday about those findings.
Ms. Stauch introduced a vampire called Justice. She said that there was a button in her cell that she could summon Justice, Jasper, perhaps Patrick, if I remember correctly. She said she had been introduced to vampires when she lived in Alaska previously. And they used to go door to door like Jehovah's Witnesses. And she didn't really offer them in any kind of meaningful way, like wasn't explaining anything or trying to use that information necessarily. But she certainly referenced them throughout the interview.
Did she tell you where she got these names for these so-called vampires she's talking about?
She directed me to the movie Twilight.
And did you find out that these names were from the movie Twilight or the book series involved in Twilight?
Yeah, a few of them for sure. I'm not familiar with the series myself, but I Googled. She talked about a vampire council, and the name of the council was taken directly from that series. And then a couple of the names for sure came from there as well. Certainly, if somebody's talking about vampires and that appears real to them, that could signify that they're experiencing a mental illness. So I looked further to see, I'm looking for consistency again. So it was notable that she said that she had been interfacing with these vampires since Alaska. but she made no mention of them to the previous evaluators. And she also didn't mention them throughout her jail stay until several months in.
We noted borderline and narcissistic features given her history of instability of relationships, her history of mood swings that were, I want to say, best delineated by her public defender at that time. When we consulted with the public defender, she was the one who described an intense reactivity of emotion to different things, that just somebody who goes from 0 to 100 very quickly. We also noted her own self-report of impulsivity. Those were the primary features of a borderline personality that we noted with her. In terms of narcissistic features, she really touted her intelligence and her abilities. And when she spoke to us about her treatment in the jail, her expectations as it pertained to how she would not proceed with her defense, but how attorneys should treat her, there was some notable entitlement in that, that gave us a hint that there might be some narcissistic features in there as well.
Bryan, putting aside the fact whether she's faking it or not, would Stout having multiple personalities equal an insanity defense?
Yes and no. If she's faking it, I would lean towards no, but even if she does have multiple personalities, the argument from the prosecutor would be many people throughout the country and even the world have multiple personalities, but they do not murder, because the ultimate question is whether or not she can appreciate right from wrong. Now, if she does have multiple personalities, and one of those personalities is a 6-year-old girl who can't understand or appreciate right from wrong, and that's the person who murdered 11-year-old Gannon, then maybe, if she can prove that. But it's really about the understanding of right from wrong, not necessarily the diagnosis or the faking the diagnosis she has.
I'm glad you explained that difference. And Terry, actually I want to go to you to do another, I think, misconception people have, because Stout was found competent to stand trial, but that is very different between competency to stand trial and mental illness that could be used as a defense, right? What's the difference?
So you're right, Jesse. A lot of people do confuse the two. Competency to stand trial means that you understand the charges that are being brought against you, and you can help your attorney with your defense. And that was determined early on here. Stout was deemed competent to stand trial. She knew and understood the charges against her. But as Bryan said, that mental illness is completely different. You can have multiple mental illnesses, but if you understand the difference between right and wrong, if you have that mens rea, meaning that you understand that difference, you might be guilty of that. Here, I definitely think that she could be found guilty even if she has a mental illness. And so those are the differences, and people oftentimes, like you said, they do confuse the two.
All right,